Welcome to this video. Today I want to show you why the London is such an easy opening to play and especially suited for new chess players. So it goes like this: pawn to d4, pawn to d5, bishop to f4. So the idea of this is to put the pawn on e3, c3, a knight on d2, a knight on f3, playing the pawn to h3, and then develop the bishop on f1 to either e2 or d3. This is like the basic concept of the London. And then once you achieved this setup, you have a very solid position with easy play, which is one of the best things for new chess players, as it is harder to make mistakes when all your pieces are well placed. So usually it continues like black plays knight to f6, white will play pawn to e3, continuing the setup. For example, black can now play the move pawn to e6, intending now to trade these bishops. Then we will continue knight to f3, bishop can go to d6, and we'll play bishop to g3, so that we can recapture with the h pawn. It's very important to capture towards the center. We do not want to take f takes g3, because then that will ruin our pawn structure. And pawn structures are very important in chess. So let's see, after e3, most black players, they play c5. And now here white has two options. The main one is to play knight to f3. But white can also try to play the setup with pawn to c3. Because then when black plays knight to c6, white can continue with knight to d2. And this can actually be quite a smart move order at times. Because if black now plays queen b6, putting pressure on the b2 pawn, after queen to b3, intending to trade the queens. If black now takes, we will capture with the pawn, opening up for the a file, for the rook, with a great position. Instead, after queen b3, black players have usually played a move like c4. Now we do not want to take on b6, because then black will recapture a takes b6 and open up his a file, which is unpleasant. Instead, we can now play queen to c2, and it's very important now to highlight the difference from the other line, because let's look at the other line quickly. Because here, after knight f3, knight c6, and c3, if black now plays queen to b6, hitting this pawn, and we play in a similar fashion, queen to b3, black will play pawn to c4, hitting the queen. We will now retreat the queen to c2. And then black has this very great idea of playing bishop to f5, sacrificing the bishop, but then being able to take the pawn on b2. For example, let's say he takes the bishop, which is a bad move. Queen takes b2. And after a move like e6, next move, black can take this rook on a1, and black is winning here. So if you look at playing c3 earlier, and knight c6, and you start with knight to d2, after queen to b6, queen to b3, c4, queen c2, as we just looked at before. After bishop to f5, now we can simply take this bishop, because after queen takes bishop, queen takes b2, now we can simply move the rook. We can go rook to b1, we can play queen to b1. We have many different options, but here white is a piece up here. So this bishop f5 idea no longer works. And that's why this is actually an interesting move order for the London. And only when black has played a move like e6, we can play knight to f3. So this is just one option. Also, in normal London move order, let's go back. Like d5, bishop f4, knight f6, e3, c5, knight to f3, which is the main move, knight c6, and knight bd2. Black has to... but black has a line of playing queen b6 here. And this line white needs to know, because it's a very concrete line, so you basically have to study it a little bit as white. I think this is one of the only lines where you need quite extensive preparation, or just a little bit preparation at the lower levels. But I also think that it's very few low-rated players who will play this line, because it's very complicated. It continues like this. Pawn takes c5. Now if black recaptures the pawn, the queen is in a bit of trouble, and we can eventually open up the game like something like c4. or even bishop e2, followed up by c4 later. So for this reason, black players, after queen b6 takes, they take this pawn on b2. Now white has a double pawn on the c file. And the theory continues here. I'm not going to give a thorough theory introduction in this video, but I think maybe I'll make another one. But after rook to b1, black has different moves. One move is to play queen to c3. The other move is to play queen a3. Or you can also take the pawn, but this is not good. But the game continues in a very complicated manner. And it's a bit nice for white to know at least a little bit. Usually white follows up with the bishop to b5 in the next move. But anyways, I want to show you why the London is so great. And it's very universal. For example, after pawn to e6, we can still play bishop to f4. After a move like g6, we can still play bishop to f4 and e3. So the point is that it works against almost any opening. Even, let's say, a move like d6, we can also play bishop f4, now stopping black's pawn to e5. There are only a few lines where bishop f4 are not a great move. And that can be after pawn to c5, hitting this pawn on d4. For example, now if we play bishop d4, bishop f4, we will take here. And now we cannot recapture with any pawn on d4, and our queen will become into trouble after knight to c6, hitting the queen. So for this reason, after c5, we can instead play the move pawn to c3, defending the pawn on d4, and the next move we can play bishop to f4. And this is a very simple way to play. Some ambitious players would probably say that d5 is the best move, but c3 is a very simple move. Just play bishop f4 next move, and all is fine. At the same time, after the gambit, after pawn to e5, bishop f4 is obviously not a good move here, but here we will simply take, and perhaps we can put the bishop on f4 later, supporting the pawn on e5. And even after a move like knight to c6, bishop f4 is still a great idea. Same after f5, bishop f4, I follow up with e3 is still fine, completely fine. So in general, as you can see, the London works against so many different systems. But now I just want to show you, like, again, illustrate how to place the pieces in the London. Because once you understand more or less where to put the pieces, this will work against almost any opening. So let's continue with, for example, c5, knight f3, knight c6, c3. And let's say e6. Knight c6, knight bd2, e6, and now we play c3. Now we have the London pyramid here. And the next move, let's say black plays a move like bishop to e7, which is a bit passive. We can put the bishop on d3. Very strong bishop, eyeing the king side. Let's say black castles. Now we will continue our setup with pawn to h3. And the reason we play this move is so that this bishop on f4, once it's hit by something like knight to h5, for example here, we can always retreat it to h2. And now this knight on h5 is doing no good. But let's imagine we don't do this, then a move like knight h5 can often be annoying. Because we always have to deal with him hitting our bishop, and we don't really want to give away this London bishop. It's quite a nice piece, so we would rather keep it. So that's why we play pawn to h3. Let's say black plays a move like b6, intending to put the bishop on b7. Then a very logical way to follow up is to castle our king. And let's say black plays bishop b7. Now the very normal way to put our queen is to put it on e2. And here you can clearly see that white's bishops are slightly more active than the black's one, especially the one on d3. You can see the bishop on b7, it's just standing looking into his own knight and the pawn on d5. So it's not looking too fun for black here. And our bishop is hitting the king side, and all our pieces are standing in great squares. And another typical idea is to eventually play at some point like knight to e5 at some point. For example, after bishop to d6. Sometimes white can play knight to e5. Another option is to play bishop to g5. There are many different options, because after, let's say, knight to e5, we have to look out sometimes for what happens after queen c7, and he's attacking on e5. Then we can, okay, maybe defend like knight here. But anyways, the position is very simple to play, and white has absolutely no problems. Also, at some point, there are also some other ideas. Like, let's say black doesn't do much. Let's say he plays a move like bishop here, and we castle, and he plays a move like maybe rook c8. Sometimes white also wants to play queen e2, with the idea of at some point taking on c5, and then pushing e4, opening up the game. Because now if black doesn't do anything, let's say he plays b5, we can play e5, and we're grabbing space, hitting this knight on the f6 and creating some trouble for black. So in general, the London is a very simple opening, but also a very good one. And that's why you see it played by even a lot of very strong players, especially in Rapid. It's very hard to face, and also Blitz. So that's why I recommend it for all new chess players. It's really a great opening, and just make sure that if you face this line here, to check it out a little bit. Just check, okay, what does the database say you should do? But in general, this rook b1 followed up by bishop b5. And of course, there are a lot of theory here, which I might cover in another video. But once you notice, you have basically an opening that works against almost anything as white. So I want to thank you a lot for watching, and I hope you will have a great day.